Welcome everyone to VMIA's information session for the 2026-2027 insurance renewal cycle. My name is Chris Hall. I'm the Head of Government Practice here at VMIA, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you officially to our webinar this morning. Before we get started though, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. VMIA acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we do business today, and I pay our respects to elders past and present. We acknowledge the important contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make in creating a thriving Victoria. And today I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country. So let's move on to our agenda. So this morning we will go through VMIA's Elevate Corporate Strategy and how that is helping our clients reduce their cost of risk. We'll talk about the 26-27 premium pools. We'll also talk about the performance of those pools historically. We'll then close with a panel discussion with your Q&A questions that hopefully you'll be able to put through in our Q&A chat. So a couple of housekeeping matters before we kick off. We have turned off all the cameras and the chat function across the webinar, but you'll notice your Q&A button in the top of your screen. Please start loading your questions as soon as you can think of them as we go through the presentation. You do not have to wait to the end of the session to load them up. You can load them as we go through and as the speakers speak to the particular slides. Our panel today, we're joined by Rob Funnell, VMIA Senior Underwriter in our Infrastructure and Energy practice. We're also joined by Gavin Deitch, our Insurable Risk Advisory Manager in Government Practice, as well as Zach Fankhauser, our Head of Corporate Affairs. They'll be our panelists today in taking us through the outcomes for the 26-27 insurance renewal cycle. Moving on. For those that may be joining this morning that may be new contacts in government or not familiar with VMIA and what we do, we are the government's insurer and risk advisor. We cover assets that are very varied across the state, and we're established under the Act of Victorian Managed Insurance Authority Act of 1996. Our core functions, as you can see from your screen, is to assist departments and participating bodies in the management of their risks and to act as an insurer to provide insurance services to those clients. Moving on to our next, please. As mentioned, this is a real snapshot of the diversity in the portfolio that we cover across the state. We'll get into this a little bit later, but over the last financial year of FY25, we paid out over $796 million worth of claims. We insured over $250 billion worth of state government assets, and we now have over 4,900 clients across the state. That client base is made up of, as you might imagine, cemetery trusts, public healthcare, education, government departments, statutory agencies, rural GPs. Again, a real mix of different risk portfolios that we insure for and on behalf of the state. Moving on. Again, this slide talks to that variance. We have a hospital, we have our emergency services. We work with our agencies that are responsible for the managing of our parks and our catchment areas. We have a large arts portfolio that we work with. Major projects, so anything from Suburban Rail Loop to North East Link, Westgate Extension, construction, we look after as well. So a very wide and diverse client base we have with a different set of risks. I think that's important to think about as we go through the webinar and we look at the premium pools. Moving on, please. What I'd like to do now is just to give you an insight into growth that VMIA and the state has experienced over the last 10 years. You'll be looking at the Victorian population growth of sitting around 19% over the last 10 years. However, claims paid has jumped up 130% from 347 million to 796 million. The assets insured have jumped up 47% from 173 billion to now over 250 billion. Claims growth is being driven by certain factors, and again, we'll get into the detail on the impact of claims on the premium pools later in our presentation. But I hope that this graph highlights that the significant amount of claims that we're seeing against the state over the last 10 years does have a direct and tangible relationship with premium outcomes experienced over that time. So we'd like to move on now to our next slide. Talk to you a little bit around VMIA's corporate strategy, which is called Elevate. Our two main goals in Elevate is to optimize our clients' cost of risk, as well as become a high-performance organisation. What that practically means for our clients is we aspire to provide you with a better client service. Webinars such as this is one way that we can give back around information and data, but it's important always to remember you do have a risk advisor that, again, is only a phone call or email away for your client service needs. We aspire to improve your insurable risk maturity, so to work with you and collaborate with you to understand what's driving your cost of insurable risk, what's driving your claims experience, as well as your premium experience. We aspire to provide you with advice around claims reduction to pinpoint those areas which may be causing an increase in your claims. We work with you proactively around identifying gaps in insurance to ensure that you're not unconsciously uninsured, looking for risk transfer arrangements where there may not have been for new projects or for a change in your particular risk profile. We always look to provide value for money, as well as provide a safe pair of hands in terms of managing the premium pools for and on your behalf. So that's a little bit around about who VMIA is, what we do, the diversity of our client base, and what our strategy sets out. So I'm now pleased to hand over to Rob Funnell, who will start taking us through the premium pools for 26-27. But firstly, he'll be looking at some of the factors that are impacting those pools as we head into that cycle. Rob?
Thanks, Chris. And just as a reminder, any questions through the session, please pop them in the chat, and we'll answer those questions as best we can at the end of the panel discussion. So you can see from the slide, there's two factors that help how we A, put the premium pool together, and B, how we then allocate it across the client base. So when we're looking at the overall premium pool that we collect within the state, we look at the claims costs that we're likely to incur, and we use that historical data. Then, of course, our management costs and how of running the organisation. It's less any investment incomes that we might receive on the claims reserves that we currently have, and that will come up with the premium pool for the state. And then we look at the client's specific factors such as their claims experience, the scale of their assets and their activities or the exposure, the risk of the assets and their activities, so their risk profile, and that determines the claims, the client's premium. The main drivers, as you would expect, are the claims costs. We use this to estimate the pools based on historical data and the severity of the claims that we're receiving. We then allocate a proportion of the pool based on that consideration to each of the clients through their property assets, their risk profile, high or low risk, as I mentioned, physical losses, natural perils, or lawsuits. Each client's circumstances are very much different, and we use those views to build up the pool and inform our premium allocation. The premium pools for MI property, cyber, D&O, 689.7 million, and I'll just touch on a few of the macro factors involved in that. The property and the CL premium pool remains unchanged at 120.6 million and 119.2 for the CL respectively. Excuse me, whilst inflation continues to impact insurance costs, and for the CL, there's been a modest increase in claims assumptions for public liability. This has been offset by our continued effort to reduce our own expenses through our Elevate strategy, a reduction in the capital recovery charge allocated to these classes, consistent with our 2025 to 30 capital plan, a reduction in our property reinsurance program, and slightly lower professional indemnity claims assumptions. In terms of the cyber pool has increased by 5% to 17.5 million, in line with expected claims growth. Despite having a benign claims experience, we are seeing an underlying claims environment, particularly around those small personal information claims. And the cyber attacks are becoming more sophisticated, as everyone would be aware. From a directors and officers viewpoint, the premium pools increased by 8% to 14.2. We expect there will be more large claims in the future, heightened by the claims risk environment, particularly for employment practices liability. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Although we've been able to avoid increases in the property and liability pools this year due to the claims reductions, these factors remain relevant in the medium to longer term. Social factors contributing to the costs include the escalation in damages awarded by courts, watching for the novel ways in which courts are establishing case law, particularly in the management liability space, and we expect to see this impact the PPL or the public and products liability at some point. Watching escalations in a number of nervous shock claims as well. Our society is becoming much more litigious, and Victoria leads the way nationally in that space, and governments are obviously a prime target for someone to be held accountable. The ongoing climate risk change, which we're seeing through our weather again through this summer, and today with potential storms and floods throughout the state. The cost of extreme weather events in Australia is more than tripled in the last 3 decades, based on the Insurance Council of Australia Catastrophe Reinsurance Report. And flood events are increasing with greater impacts on communities in urbanised areas and how the water moves around. From a general inflation viewpoint, CPI rose 3.8 in the 12 months to October 2025 and peaked at 8% in 2023 through the COVID years. Particular note in the construction space is still the increased cost of materials, labour and other inputs through the construction processes and projects. Although construction inflation has steadied, we're still seeing the impact of significant increases coming through from 2022-23. The surge in the price of concrete, global demands, supply chain bottlenecks and logistical challenges are all still consistent with what we've seen over the last several years. There is some uncertainty around what will happen in the construction market, emerging geopolitical shifts, including China's economic stimulus, the political tensions through trade, and of course a changing US government position. Even though inflation has stabilised somewhat, the impact on future premiums will be normalised and reflected accordingly. If we go to slide 11. Just to summarise, in terms of property, there's no change to the property pool. Mild increase due to some recent claims experience across the overall portfolio. From a liability viewpoint, as I mentioned, we're seeing an increase in nervous shock claims. The courts making some novel ways of holding people responsible from a duty of care. The awards are increasing consistently through the court, and the social factors are contributing to an increased costs, including the escalation in damages, as I mentioned. D&O exposure across the government for EPL breaches, particularly where the sector relates to frontline workers and emergency services workers, is still of a concern. And as I mentioned before, in terms of cyber, notifications across the portfolio are emerging, particularly in the small claims for breaches of personal and identifiable information or PLL claims. Last year, we earned over 584 million in net premiums. We know that's a lot, but at the same time, we paid over. We remain committed to ensuring that the the broadest possible cover is provided to our clients at the lowest possible cost. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Gavin.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday. Now, I am going to start with a bit of a small confession, if I may, because I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room who may feel the same here, but there's nothing that really piques my energy and blood flow like a very good graph. So strap yourselves in, grab your breathing apparatus, and I have the pleasure of walking you through no less than 4 graphs with some of the associated messaging in the next few moments. Please feel free, as Rob mentioned, as Chris mentioned, pop any questions in the chat as we go along. It gives us a chance to review and formulate some responses where necessary along the way, and Zach's hosting that very ably. And even any feedback, if you want to pop in there around my appalling attempts at humour, I'll happily take some feedback along the way, whether I should tone it up or tone it down as well. So, looking at the graph on property, what does this tell us? Some of this Rob has mentioned around, we haven't got a change to the premium pool, no tangible changes in that for the upcoming renewal. So I think it's important when you look at the premium line is the orange line in there, remembering that this is all balanced out around increases in asset value bases, recent stable claims experience, reductions in reinsurance costs, and cost savings through the VMIA Elevate strategy as well. So balancing that act there around increases in asset values, but having a stable claims history allows us to have that ultimately that zero average, if you like. There may be people on the call thinking, well, hang on a minute, Gavin, I've got a premium increase this year. You're talking about no change in the premium pool. Obviously, just a reminder here that, again, Rob talked about those individual client factors in here. So considering claims experience, has there been a significant change in your asset portfolio, your asset values, and also your risk profiling, your activities, and those sorts of exposures that you have as well. So, net basis overall, some will have increases, some will have decreases, but netting out over zero for the 26-27 renewal. That orange line, the premium pool, you'll see that up to the years 2025. So we don't have a full data set yet for 26, but obviously has highlighted previously that premium pool will remain steady for the upcoming renewal. Now, I did just want to take a moment to, I guess, draw your attention to the little slither on this particular graph highlighted as IBNR. I am going to turn this a little bit more in the liability slide that follows, but I just wanted to highlight IBNR for anybody who's thinking what on earth IBNR might be. Now, I will say personally, IBNR resonates massively with me because IBNR was an acronym that I used very often as a child, or not a child, a teenager, should I say, when I was walking out the house for the evening to disappear for the evening, and my parents would often shout, "Where on earth are you going?" And my response would be, "I'll be nowhere relevant." So IBNR is certainly an acronym that resonates with me. In this particular instance, much more useful. IBNR stands for incurred but not reported as well. So these are claims that have been noted or highlighted or incurred, but they haven't formally been reported as yet. And a reserve has been set aside for them, but I'll talk about those a little more in detail in the next slide and just provide a little bit of an analogy for those who may be unfamiliar. As mentioned, macro drivers for the property claims and property pool, inflation, cost of labour, natural disasters, and those local and global climate impact trends. They're continuing to contribute to more frequent and intense weather events, as I'm sure we're all experienced, and largely influenced as well by natural catastrophe claims as well, thinking back to some of the large floods 2022, 2023, and obviously some of the impact of flooding and bushfires in the early part of this year as well. Also seeing a little bit of an increase in the frequency of those large physical claims, so where we've got large building fires or total loss building fires, through to things like burst pipes, which cause significant damage to premises and property. Okay, I'm going to now move on to talking a little bit about the combined liability side of things as well. So again, no change, as mentioned, no change to the premium pool on this one. What you can see from the graph, there's, I guess, a steady trend for the last 9-10 years of being a steady growth in the claims experience. If you look at the green bars, I guess what you'll start to see is a couple of trends in there, and I'm going to talk to those in a moment as well, but just highlighting as well the orange line of the premium pool, again, remaining steady through to 26-27. Now, again, another confession here. I love a bit of amateur clairvoyancy. So what I'm going to attempt to do here is, looking at the graph that you have in front of you, try and look at my inner crystal ball and then try and consider what sort of questions you may have or things that you may be looking at going, well, what does that mean? So number one, I guess, is probably around why is the IBNR, as referenced from the previous slide, why we're seeing the IBNR much more prevalent here than we saw with the property claims where it was just a small slither in the 2025 year. And the second question, I think maybe on people's tongues, doesn't the green bar chart show that the claims are actually decreasing in recent years and trending in a good direction? So I just wanted to spend a moment, if I can, just to provide a little bit of a context, a little bit of analogies around what's at play here as well. So if we think about property claims when they occur, we have a flood event, a fire event. What we can often find with, let's say, a fire in a building is we can actually see within a pretty relatively short time frame what the impact is. So if you have a fire in a building, the damage is pretty recognizable, and typically efforts to move to recovery or reinstatement happen relatively quickly, which then means that the claim follows suit relatively quickly with a property damage. Now, unlike property claims, what we have is liability claims is what's colloquially referred to as long-tailed claims. So I guess in simple terms, a liability claim can take several years to be incurred and even more years to actually be reported as well. So, if I think about this as let's think about this as a particular analogy. So if I use myself in this, and disclaimer here, if my imaginary story that I'm about to tell resonates with anybody or speaks to an incident that has occurred, it's purely coincidental, I promise. But if I just use myself as I guess an analogy in this, let's say I suffer a personal injury whilst I'm out there in public land, and I suffer a bit of an injury and I go for some treatment afterwards. That treatment goes over weeks or months and it starts to get a little better or starts to feel a little bit better. I think, okay, things are starting to get a little bit better. There's no claim needed here because, accidents happen. What happens then is maybe after months of treatment or potentially even years of treatment, I'm still not back to where I was before. And I may now be suffering with some additional symptoms or additional injuries on the back of that as well. So potentially more costs for medical treatment, potentially more treatment. And now we're getting into, months and potentially even years. And then let's say hypothetically, one night I'm sat on the couch and I see a nice little TV advertisement pop up saying, have you been injured in a public place? We can help you. So what happens then is it starts to change maybe the thinking from me thinking, accidents happen. I've got all of these costs. I've got these issues that I've got. Maybe my financial situation is slightly differently. My circumstances change. And actually now I am going to speak to an injury lawyer or a professional to get some advice on that. So I guess the reason I use that analogy is you could see there why that personal injury has taken months and months to manifest, if you like. And then it explains why the reporting or the injury notification the claim can take quite a number of months or even years to follow suit as well. So that's what we mean when we talk about long-tailed liability claims. They certainly don't typically develop the same sort of way that property claims do as well. For that reason, going back to the graph, that's why you tend to see, your later years, your 2018s, 19s, 20s, 21s, they're more matured because some of those long-tailed liability claims will have now come through. Whereas your more recent years, your 23s, your 24s, your 25, we're probably not in a situation where all of those liability claims have yet matured. Hopefully my analogy provided a little bit of additional insight into how these things operate as well. Any similarities in my crazy stories to real life instances, I promise is purely coincidental. Just remember that this graph is actually on a policy year basis where the impact of the losses occurred as well. And again, that's why it includes that section around the IBNR as well. Just some macro drivers, again, eloquently mentioned by Rob previously as well. That changing litigation environment or the litigious environment, some additional expectations, additional costs being awarded by courts. These are all typically things that are contributing towards the increasing costs as well. However, again, as mentioned around the premium pool, the beauty of the VMIA program is doing our best to smooth all of these issues out and offsetting against some of the initiatives that's already been mentioned. Okay, I will now move along to talk about cyber. So this graph really focuses on the premium pool. Just reminding as well that this is a relatively new product, so first introduced in 22-23. And probably an important note to mention is that the VMIA cover has really continued to evolve to try and meet the threat. Obviously, we've had cyber threats have been around for a number of years now, but in terms of how parties are being attacked or how issues are materializing, that risk landscape has really evolved over the past number of years. And again, the VMIA cover has continued to evolve, so adding more and more coverage where we can. mentioned on there around top 5 risks, but I guess things they're not in any particular order, but just things that some of these things we're very familiar with. Other parts of this are really being adapted by things like AI or turbocharged by things like AI as well. So phishing, social engineering, ransomware, unauthorized access to systems, particularly an interesting one around third-party issues. So I think we've seen probably a lot of press exposure in the past few years where organizations may have been impacted, subject to a cyber incident, which was actually the infiltration was actually through a third party, or the data breach was data held by a third party as well. So it really goes to speak about the importance of making sure we've got good mechanisms, good mitigations, good controls in place with our third parties, including good contracts, making sure that we've got a lot of mitigation, a lot of good risk assessment that's gone into that process as well. And again, mentioning the threat of AI, things like deepfake scams, they serve to add an extra layer of complexity to the prevention mechanisms and the detection mechanisms as well. So that's just another thing that we're obviously is a growing area, and it's something that certainly the fraudsters, the scammers, and the data hackers are utilizing to their benefit as well. Just to highlight some of the, I guess, benefits again from the VMIA program, that we do have a panel of specialist vendors that is there to support you as our clients. Those services will include response to a cyber incident on things like IT forensic investigation, obviously legal advice, data analytics, PR, crisis management, dark web monitoring, and even credit and identity monitoring as well. So there are services, there are vendors available to support with those times if we have a cyber incident. Okay. Last but certainly not least, D&O, or Directors and Officers Liability. With this particular one, the D&O policy, just a reminder, provides cover for directors and officers liability and unemployment practices liability claims as well. So Rob gave some statistics there earlier about the amount taken in premium, but also how much has been paid out in claims under this particular policy over the past number of years as well. So a lot of activity in employment practices claims, some of those factors influencing EPL claims, things like the economic conditions themselves. We can sometimes forget that, the geopolitical or the economic environment around us can have an individual impact on our claims experience as well. And even things like rising redundancy rates and the use of AI being relied upon by applicants bringing claims is something that's being seen at the moment. I think probably lastly on that one, also seen an increase in the industrial action, and that's including very, very complex bargaining agreement awards, which have resulted in some disputes around interpretation and then leading to challenges for employers to resource. Some of them are very, very highly complex awards in there as well. And just a statistic as well from the Fair Work Commission recently is they've revealed a 10% increase in claims in this area lodged in the 24-25 period. That is all from me, folks. I appreciate your time, and now I'll be handing back over to Chris.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you everyone who has submitted their questions so far. Could I just ask you again just to pause and reflect on what Rob and Gavin have taken us through there? And if you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A chat now so the panel can be prepared to respond. In terms of next steps, our renewal timeline for 26-27 looks as follows on the screen. Just a reminder that you'll be receiving your client information packs and invoices for 26-27 in early June. If you've got any issues or you forecast any programmatic changes that you may wish to change, please reach out to your risk advisor as a matter of course. They'll be willing to sort of answer any queries you may have, especially around your individual insurance arrangements, including the fulfillment of the need to pay those invoices by the due date in and around 31 July. So again, just a reminder, early June, you'll be getting your invoices and client information packs. And if you have any queries, please reach out to your risk advisor so we can assist you. Moving on to the next steps and thinking about 2026, the calendar year, I do want to remind everyone, especially those that may be new to government or new in interacting with VMIA, as a way of fulfilling our mission and our obligations to government, we run a training calendar and various courses designed to uplift risk and insurable risk maturity every calendar year. Including, we have a new micro-credential course that's been co-developed by RMIT, which is titled Risk Management in the Public Sector. All of the information regarding our training courses can be accessed via our VMIA website, or again, please don't hesitate to reach out to your risk advisor to talk about our courses, but also about what some of your organisational needs may be. We also today have a QR code which you can scan. And again, I've just given you the Learning Hub website link there as well, if you do have that interest. So thank you, everyone. That concludes the formal part of the webinar, but we now get an opportunity to speak to the panel and answer any questions you may have. So could I please hand over to Zach to moderate the Q&A chat? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. Well, we've had a few questions coming in, so I'm going to publish them one by one as I read them out. So firstly, question from Salman. In relation to cyber insurance, if a Victorian government entity introduces a new IT system where its terms of use state that it will not be responsible for any data or privacy breaches and claims an exemption from IPPs, do other Vic government insured entities using that system need to notify this to VMIA? Chris?
I'm happy to take that one first, Zach. Firstly, Salman, thank you for your question. There's two ways of notifying VMIA in relation to this type of risk information. So many of you would have participated in our risk renewal information process that is just closing last week, I believe, in relation to gathering risk-related data on your certain products. But in this case, Salman, I think it's worthwhile having an individual discussion with your risk advisor, certainly around what and how your cyber cover and its limits respond to any potential liabilities that the introduction of this system would actually either introduce or attempt to transfer to your government entity. So again, I would say that this is one that we'll happily take offline and have your risk advisor contact you to talk about it at an individual client level, given that the terms of use may have particular protections and or indemnities that we would wish to work through with you. It's also a good example, this question, of where there are terms of use or contracts in play with third parties. Always a good idea to talk them through with your risk advisor if you have concerns around insurance, including who's insuring what and what liabilities may be transferred or passed on to the state. So great question, Salman, and we'll happily follow that up with your risk advisor. Zach.
Yeah, thanks very much. Continuing on cyber, question from Kent. It was mentioned at the outset, cyber attacks are focused on personal data. Is that personal data held by departments or agencies, or more broadly, personal data across the Victorian jurisdiction and even more broadly, the Australian and global environment? Gavin?
Yeah, good. Thanks for the question, Ken. And I think really the focus here is on the personal data held by the departments and agencies. And I think if we just reflect for a moment the vastness and the how broad the services are that we provide across departments and agencies in Victoria, you can start to get a bit of an imagination of all of the different types of personal data that are held by the departments and agencies for the various services that are undertaken. You know, if I think from medical records to school records, all of these records contain personal information in there. So rather, that's really the focus. And when we're talking about the theft of personal data, it's the personal data held by the department or agencies for the services for which they're providing.
Great, thanks, Gavin. All right, well, moving on from cyber, a question about premium setting from Annette. How far back do you go when assessing the claims history of a client? How do you factor in one-off large claims that may have been made in a particular year, but not likely to recur when assessing insurance premiums for a client?
I'm happy to pick that one up, Zach. That's a great question, Annette, and it goes and speaks to a little bit around what assumptions we make when thinking about those IBNR claims. So if we look at it from a property perspective, we have seen a real increase in the number of climate-related claims over the last 10 years, or what we would term natural catastrophe type claims, fire, flood, storm claims that have come across the entire government portfolio. So when we assess those one-off large claims, we're really looking at what's the actual driver of the individual claim. Is it natural catastrophe, or is it a set of circumstances or scenarios that truly would be a one-off or considered? So we're making some assumptions around the risk profile of the client and what future claims may be brought against that client based on that past experience. So it is a little bit in relation to what type of claims that we do see. Zach, to illustrate this point, I wonder if we might go back to the property graph slide. Is there a way of going back, team, to the property graph slide? There we are there. This is a really good one. So in 2009, in that policy year, that's Black Saturday. 2011, we had another significant natural catastrophe event. And then we had a real period of benign claims experience between 2012 to 2019. 2020 through to even this year seen an increase in those natural catastrophe type events, which actually incurred a large loss for the state. So you can see how that one large event, so to speak, 15 years ago, we've seen increased frequency again. So there is an actuarial balance that we must strike in reserving for future losses. But I think it really does, in answer to your question, it does realistically mean that we need to look at what was the driver of that one-off large claim. Gavin, did you want to expand on that point?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's good. And I'd probably just, if I just put my over and above that, put my risk management hat on here. And obviously the question around likelihood can be a very subjective question, and people may have different views on likelihood as well. But I guess if we put ourselves in the situation of maybe a reinsurer who potentially looks at some of these and says, well, you know, this, looking at history, looking at when things happen, yes, they're less frequent, but when they happen, they're pretty severe. I think the more that we collectively can do in conjunction with our clients to really push what have we done, what mitigations have we introduced, what additional controls have we got to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or even if the likelihood is less frequent or the impact is less severe as well. So certainly where you are doing all of the good work in risk management around mitigation as well, certainly share that information with us, because that's useful information for us to be able to have for renewal time, to have those discussions obviously internally, but also with reinsurers who may be looking at some of these large catastrophic type risks and saying, so tell me how are you preventing this as well? And all of that information and great work that you're doing to stop it being likely again, that's great information to share with us, and we can use that to go on the offensive on your behalf, if you like, to make sure that we're keeping premiums as low as we can.
Right, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Gavin. I had a question now come in from Amr. We have a land and building valuation scheduled for this year as of 30th of June 2026. When is the last date to advise the insurance / replacement values so that they could be considered to calculate the premiums? Rob, would you like to take this?
Yeah, as the guys have mentioned, we've just recently gone through the gathering information for the renewal cycle. But if at any time throughout a policy year you have significant changes to your values or activities, things that you may have acquired or new developments come online, feel free at any time to give us that updated information. So if that valuation comes in next month, give it to us as quickly as you can, and we'll use that in the renewal calculations. So it's not restricted to the information gathering. Anytime through the policy period, you can notify us of any of the changes to your assets in terms of values, additions or deletions.
Just to further drill down onto that point, Rob, we also depending on when those valuations are noted to us within the insurance cycle, we would make the appropriate adjustments with your premium based on the information that you submit. So whilst Amir, specifically to your question around 30th of June, we'll have already calculated the 26-27 premiums for you and issued the invoice. But if that valuation has substantive changes to your risk profile, and when you declare them, we'll talk to you about what, if any, adjustments need to be made to your program, including to your premium. So I think that's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Rob. Just while I'm waiting to see if any other questions come in, Gavin, thinking about everything we've heard and seen today on the premium pools and the factors influencing them, have you got any reminders for our clients listening of any basic tips or hints or areas to focus on?
Yeah, thanks. It's probably not going to be earth-shattering, to be honest with you. A lot of the most effective tools and tips and techniques are some of the most basic sometimes, but they really do make a difference, particularly when we think about those client-specific influences on the pool. So one that's always very dear to my heart, and I'm sure when I mention this to people on the call, there'll be some sort of form of nodding or potentially even rolling of the eyes based on experiences as well. But making sure that those asset registers are as up to date as possible. I've worked in many organisations in my career, and I'm probably yet to find in the organisations I've worked a world-class asset register that's really part of a cycle or a rhythm, if you like, of making sure that those asset registers are kept up to date, the valuations are accurate and reflective. So even things like that, I know, can be a massive uphill battle, but that really can help, and it really can assist with alleviating any problems in there as well. So, for example, hypothetical, if you've got something on your asset register that's declared at a $2-3 million value, and then there's a claim for it coming in at $20-30 million, obviously that can create some challenges and some hurdles to overcome along the way as well. And I guess if you do have situations like that, again, putting my risk management hat on here, the question really to ask is this a one-off, or is this part of potentially a more systemic gap analysis we may need to undertake and review that we have to think as well. And I think is that maybe one initiative I found useful when I've been in roles similar to those on the call, that where you can try and involving yourself in the cross-referencing of what's going on in the organization. So I'll give an example of this. I was aware in one organization we had some huge new initiatives around new assets, new facilities, and I was able to utilize that to say, where have I seen that then be cross-referenced after completion? Where am I seeing that cross-referenced within our asset register? So, a $36 million new water park in the asset register 2 years later is still showing us the $2 million old one as well. So those are just some small, hopefully helpful tips as well. And look, it's very, very difficult to keep on top of what's going on in the organization. It's very, very challenging, particularly in very diverse and large organizations as well. But, where you can, immersing yourself in information that might provide an insight into a new service, a new asset, a new initiative that's being rolled out, and just thinking back how that ties into your risk profile, how that ties into your exposure, and how that ties into your asset declarations is just hopefully one small tip that, just a reminder, probably, I'm sure people know this, but hopefully it's just a little bit of a reminder around some of those challenges and how we may be able to do some small bits and pieces to try and help.
Great, thanks, Gavin. Well, we've had one more come in from Annette. Rather basic one. Annette's words, not mine. Is there any particular time frame within which claims need to be lodged, or rather, how soon after becoming aware of a claim should clients notify us? Rob?
Yeah, thanks. It depends on the type of claim and under the type of product. Certainly from a property asset viewpoint, if you've had an incident where you believe there may be some material damage or business interruption damage, you should notify the claims team of the incident and at least give the basic details as soon as you possibly can. Liability is a bit more difficult because usually you're not aware of some of the incidents that have happened until they're actually coming through as a legal claim. So again, as soon as if you're aware of an incident at any time, you should at least report it to your claims team. That doesn't necessarily mean that claim's taken into consideration. Incidents is usually there to make sure the insurer's got a record of them. So there may be no monetary value to them. There may be very limited information on circumstances, but at least the incident has been reported. At the very least, you should keep an incident register, and in the event that any of those materialise at some point in time, you've at least got a notification within your own organisation of an incident. So to answer the question simply, there is no real reporting requirements. As soon as you're aware, you should pass them on, though. Depending on the long tail classes, there are two types of wordings. There's an occurrence-based wording and a claims made. If you do happen to have a claims made wording, there are some strict reporting requirements around the times on when those incidents occur. And it would really encourage you, if any product that you have has claims made, that you report all incidences at that time that you become aware, because there are cut-off dates in there as to when that claim would be actually covered under that policy. But simply speaking, no, there's not a stretched a significant date that you have to report a claim on. It's when you become aware of the incident is the best time.
Great, thanks, Rob. Well, I think we've reached the end now, so I'd like to say thank you to all of you for coming and spending some time with us. If a question comes to you later, always happens, you think of the great questions just when it's too late to ask them. Well, it's not too late. You can contact your risk advisor, who, as Chris said earlier, is always only just a phone call or an email away. So please do that. And thank you once again for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.